Good morning. This is Friday, the 2nd of March. I'm Ron. Welcome to Storytime. And today I'm continuing with my series, part 4 of what's the problems with right wing talk radio. And one of the big problems with right wing talk radio is that they constantly, and it's not just talk radio, as a matter of fact, but the vast majority and almost all conservatives and Republicans that I hear on the radio or television or read in print is that the fact that they are in the habit of conceding the point, and it's devastating. It puts the Republicans and the conservatives in a bad light. It makes them less desirable as a in terms of attracting new and young voters and political activists and whatnot. And what I mean by conceding the point is the left carefully picks and uses words to try to convey create psychological images. We're in a society in which more and more we communicate by telling stories and paint verbal pictures. And that's due to the left. The left is creating pressure to move in that particular direction. It's not a good direction because it's the way the cavemen communicated. So it's not modern. It's an ancient way, and it's inefficient and ineffective as a source of communication. But nonetheless, that's the way they like to do. And the left goes ahead and creates certain words to create some type of vivid image for the listener, and usually an image that will help them steer them in the left's direction. One of those words is dreamers, and it's a word that the conservatives have conceded. They've conceded that there's a group of people that are here illegally that are not illegal aliens, they're dreamers. And the problem with conceding the point is that if these folks are dreamers, and you, as a conservative, want to see that they are, for instance, deported because, after all, they broke the law coming here, whether they did it on their own or they didn't do it on their own, or to have some other kind of reckoning for them if sending them back to their home of origin is somehow intolerable. But the point is that they have to have some sort of accountability and consequences for the actions even of their parents. Then, and you can see the point that they're dreamers, then what does that make you? Doesn't that make you a rather ugly person? You're willing to deport dreamers. You're willing to have them arrested. You're willing to have them swept up in raids. You're willing to have them put in detention centers. You're doing all this to the dreamers. And so, how does that then going to work psychologically for your supporters? Aren't your supporters going to be a bit squeamish about doing this because they don't want to be labeled as something ugly or hideous because they're opposing dreamers, because they're trying to put dreamers in a detention center, because they're trying to deport dreamers back to their home of origin, because they're trying to make sure dreamers suffer the consequences of their actions. So the battle is always at the root is going to be over the language. What words you're going to use, how you define things, is always going to be the battle. And Republicans concede over and over and over and over and over again. And by conceding, they put themselves in a very awkward position, very awkward spot. It makes it very difficult for them to mount successful campaigns to represent their viewpoints. They end up making themselves look silly or worse, and they become more and more unattractive to new potential party members, new voter registrants, and new people that might be run for office as Republicans and conservatives. So, in the case of Dreamers, you want to stick to perhaps illegal aliens. because psychologically that makes sense. If you're interested in deporting people, you're not interested in deporting dreamers. You're interested in deporting people that are here illegally, people that have broken the law, or you might find some other type of nickname: robbers, thieves. Because in essence, if you come to this country and you break the law to come here, then anything you get is fruit of a poisonous tree. You are stealing. You are a thief. You're stealing from not just American citizens, but from those green card holders, those people that are here legally, that waited in line, went by the rules, went by the law, and expect to be rewarded for that. You're screwing them. That's what you're doing, and stealing from them. No doubt about that. So the other one word that is constantly a concession that drives me crazy is progressive. Again, think about this. You're going to concede that your political opponents are progressives? And I hear this all the time, referring to the left as progressives. Well, the progressives this, the progressives that. And then come out and try and make an argument against the progressives or against a progressive proposal. Well, if you're against what the progressives are for, what does that make you by default? Regressive. And then you can't understand, or you're puzzled or scratching your head, or you're frustrated because the left is making fun of you, calling you a caveman, a troglodyte, backwards, um, treating you like you're a cartoon. But you set yourself up for it. Quit referring to these folks as progressives. They're not. If you want to refer to them as anything, they should be called Crowleyists, because it is Herbert Crowley that is supposed to be the grandfather of the quote progressive unquote movement. That's another way to deal with progressive label, is put it in quotes. Let them know, let people know immediately. It's not I'm not saying they're progressive. That's their self label. Their self description is they're calling themselves progressives. I don't agree with it at all, because they're not progressive. They're regressive. Again, look at how they want us to communicate. Going back to that, they want us to communicate by telling stories and communicating by painting verbal pictures. Slang terms are very often verbal pictures, as an example. But the point is, they're not progressive. They're regressive. If you concede the point and call them progressive and call what they're promoting progressive, it makes you regressive by default. And again, you damage the morale of your supporters. You go ahead and make your party or your movement unattractive to new adherents, new people that are going to might come into younger people that might come into the party, might come around to your way of thinking, are going to be turned off. So you conceded 2 points. You're an anti-dreamer and you're regressive. So why would anybody want to bother to be part of your movement? A really good example of conceding the point, and another one that I see frequently that drives me crazy, is the debate about God. I saw a movie, and it was in a concentration camp, World War II, Jews in a particular barracks, and they decide that they're going to put God on trial. And so basically what it ends up boiling down to is a debate about the existence of God. Does God exist? The problem with this is a trap. It is a trap. If anybody, and you're a Christian, and anybody comes to you and says, let's debate the existence of God, there's 2 ways to handle it. The first way is to say, no, thank you. Okay? Because if you say, yes, let's have a debate about the existence of God, you've already lost the argument right there. Because you've already conceded that if there's an argument to be had, that maybe, just maybe, God doesn't exist. So you've already undercut your position. You lose right away. The other way to do it is to, they want the debate, let them debate, you proselytize. When they say, okay, go ahead and prove God's existence, okay, fine. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that anybody who believes in him shall not perish, but will have everlasting life. that type of thing. And every time it comes back to you for a rebuttal of some sort, you pick a Bible verse. Okay, because then you're maintaining your Christian integrity. But the best thing to do is to stay away from it altogether. Let's have a debate about the existence of God. Not necessary. God exists, and it's self-evident. Have a nice day, and walk away. Because again, if you agree to have that debate, you've already conceded the point. You already lose, and that's all they want you to do. They don't care whether they actually win or lose the actual debate, because they know that you've already undercut yourself. That everybody in the audience, anybody that is watching or listening, if you're doing this maybe at work and people are nearby, they're going to notice that you've already undercut your position and screwed yourself, for lack of a better term, on this particular argument. The other thing that I wanted to get to also is that the talk radio and the conservatives fail in a lot of times because they do not understand. They're shallow. Their analysis is shallow. Every politics is the ending and the beginning and ending of everything. It's the end all and be all of everything. That there is nothing else except politics. They deny the existence of cultural forces. They deny the power and pretty much the existence of philosophy and philosophical issues. One of the things in philosophy that comes up is there's various different philosophical theories. One of them is called skepticism, and skepticism is an epistemological theory, a theory about knowledge. The skeptics, and the skepticism is wrong because it's a contradiction. Skepticism says nothing can be known with certainty. The problem with that statement is that it's a statement of certainty. If you ever come up with somebody that says nothing can be known with certainty, the only way to deal with this, the correct way to deal with that, is to ask them a question. 3-word question. Are you sure? Shuts them up right away. So, but anyways, skepticism is the root of environmentalists. It is the absolute root of all environmental programs. It is saying that, again, nothing can be known with certainty, and so we have to revert to superstition. Okay, that's what they're trying to, and again, the left, who claims to be progressive, is regressive. Okay, they're trying to get us to communicate in a regressive way, and they're trying to get us to think or stop thinking and go ahead and revert to form. It's called atavism. Become atavistic and go backwards and be superstitious. And the classic example of this in environmentalism is the Endangered Species Act. The whole way that the Endangered Species Act came about was because there were skeptics that were able to successfully bully and intimidate, not convince. Because if you're starting out with a contradiction, you can't convince anybody that you're right. The only thing you can do is try to force yourself on people, bully and intimidate. And that's exactly what they did. They bullied and intimidated politicians into going along with the idea that if a species goes extinct, we don't know what's going to happen. It might be disaster. So we have to assume the worst, hope for the best, and take some action, in this case, to prevent the extinction of that particular species by putting them on an endangered list, protecting their habitat, etc. And what it really ends up being is violating people's property rights for the sake of an animal. But the point is that if it was an intellectual thing, we're having to do this because we know what's going to happen. We know for sure there's going to be a disaster. So therefore, we have to keep the snail darter, which is a type of fish. We have to keep the snail darter. It cannot go extinct because we know for sure We have all kinds of evidence and proof that it will create a food chain disaster that will result in disastrous consequences for human beings. If we knew that for sure, then it makes sense. But that's not where this is at all. It is, again, getting people to act superstitiously. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it's going to be terrible and horrible and awful. Maybe the sky is going to fall. So we need to go ahead and protect the species. It also doesn't occur to the skeptics that how do you know that keeping the species alive, taking human action to prevent the extinction of this particular species isn't going to result in an ecological disaster? How do you know that it isn't Mother Nature's plan as a part of creating a healthy ecosphere to make a particular species extinct? The fact that this species survives may have ecologically disastrous consequences. They can't answer that because, again, they've already conceded that nothing can be known with certainty. So that's the issue whenever you're listening to anybody talking about environmental issues, climate change. That's the way the climate change argument started decades ago. Somebody came along and said, "Hey, guess what, folks? Maybe her Earth is getting warmer." They said there's something called the greenhouse effect, where gases get trapped in the upper atmosphere, and those gases keep the Earth from becoming too cold. Okay, they help to keep the heat in, and so that the Earth can regulate its temperature. But maybe, just maybe, there's too many of those gases being accumulated up there, and just maybe that's going to create an increase in global temperatures, and just maybe that's going to create all kinds of disasters. Maybe the seas are going to rise and flood land masses all over the world, and that there might be all kinds of weather or climate changes, storms, etc., that might create disasters again all the way around the globe. And they said, we don't know, and we'll never know. So what we should do is assume the worst, hope for the best, and take action to prevent any increase in the temperature of the Earth. So again, climate change is all based on skepticism and based, in other words, on superstition. They're counting on people to be superstitious and to act superstitiously. And as a side note on global warming, while we're on that, there was a talk a few weeks or a few months ago from people on the left, the climate change enthusiasts, that we may need to do away with air conditioning, and that air conditioning is bad for the environment. It might be help contribute to global warming, and so everybody might have to give up their air conditioners. But the real scam with the idea of giving up air conditioning is right now, nobody really cares about global warming. It's really low on people's list of priorities. There's just not a whole lot of folks, when you're looking at a planet of over 7 billion people, there's not a whole lot of folks that are really excited about it. And the reason is, when you look, particularly in the United States, as you look at, it's a hot day, it really doesn't matter that much because everything's air conditioned. Your house is air conditioned, the place you work is air conditioned, your car is air conditioned. So you're just going from one air conditioned environment to another. You're not actually having to spend any time in the heat. And so the left knows, well, gee, if we can find a way to take away people's air conditioning and they actually have to be hot, go to work and sweat, go home and sweat, get in their cars and sweat, then they would be hopping mad, running out into the streets, screaming and yelling, and demanding that something be done about climate change. In other words, it's psychologically manipulative. Anyways, the another case for the left, the root cause of any type of government intervention, when there is, the classic example is tobacco. The government gets involved in trying to create a smoke free society. And the root of that is determinism. Determinism is a philosophical theory that's erroneous, that postulates a lack of free will on the part of individuals. Determinism says that people do what they do because they are forced to by powers beyond their control. In the case of tobacco, it is by tobacco companies and capitalism in general, but in particular, tobacco companies that are uh, brainwashing people through commercial advertising in print and otherwise, and sometimes the way they do commercial advertising, Joe Camel, and whatnot. So, try to make cigarettes attractive, and that they are thereby forcing people, brainwashing them, and forcing them to smoke. So, therefore, the government has a right, a duty to provide counter pressure, to step in and force people to not smoke, to either give up smoking if they already smoke, or to uh, force them not to smoke to begin with. Okay, that's the underlying theory for why they believe this is doable. This is the reason why they want to have this done. As again, a little aside here for the tobacco companies, there was a big, what turned things for the tobacco companies was marketing to children. And marketing to children, I believe, have no doubt that they did that because not because they wanted children to smoke, but because they wanted children to act as salesmen for their brand. And companies have been doing this for a long time, for decades, because I think they recognize the influence of children. I did it when I was about 2 years old. We went to the store, and I was with my grandmother, and I remember that I saw coffee, and I told my grandmother, buy Folgers. And so, and it dawned on me that another example of it was I saw a cereal commercial. It was supposed to be for adults, an adult cereal, but everybody in the commercial was acting goofy, really, really goofy. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why would you create a commercial in which you're portraying the adults acting this goofy? The only people that this would appeal to would be children. Oh, ding! The light goes on. That's exactly who this commercial was. Even though it's a commercial for a product that is aimed at adults, the commercial is aimed at children because the idea is to get the children to think that if mom and dad buy this cereal for themselves and eat it, they'll be as silly and goofy and fun as the people on TV. So the tobacco companies realize the same thing. We want children to be salespeople for our products. If their parents are going to smoke, then we may as well get the kids to encourage them to smoke our brand. That's where the kid thinks, not because they actually expect a 5-year-old to pick up a cigarette, light it up, and smoke. Okay, but you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You want to play it cute and try to get people's children to be your salesman, which is kind of I think it's a marginal activity at best. Then you kind of get what you deserve there. But again, the left went ahead and said, "Ah, there you go. There's your proof that the tobacco companies are forcing people, and now they're trying to force children to smoke," and that's what seemed to get everybody up in arms about tobacco. And so the government has the right, the duty to force people not to smoke. But the problem with determinism is that it's wrong. Everybody has free will. And so this idea that you don't have to have the government intervene. It's not the government's job. It is up to each individual to decide whether or not they want to, whether or not they're going to smoke. Another example of this is, and perhaps even better one, is homelessness. A lot of what we have happening with in regards to the homeless is done again out of determinism. The statement is, and the statement that I've heard from the left is, why would anybody want to live like this? Why would anybody want to live? Why would anybody in their right mind want to live in filth and without proper medical care, without being able to feed themselves properly, and panhandling all the time? Why would anybody want to do that? So therefore, they must be forced to live this way, and forced to live this way by a lack of housing, etc. And so then they say, oh, now we're going to have the government get involved, raise taxes, or do whatever is necessary in order to um, get up the money, get up the funds to provide housing for the homeless. And that we then have an obligation to do things for the homeless. And you see court cases in which people that are trying to get the homeless out of certain areas. We have a situation in Santa Ana, California, where there was hundreds lining a river. It's actually a drainage, or, well, yeah, I think it was a drainage system. But anyways, they lined this so-called river, hundreds of them. I think it's ended up being over 700 people that were living there, and fouling the area with feces, urine, and needles and whatnot. And it should have been a simple thing to say, look, this is public property. You don't get to sleep here. You don't get to live here. You just simply tell them to get out, and if they refuse to, you arrest them and put them in jail if necessary. But that only works if you know that people have free will, and that they can exercise that free will to live in a house, an apartment, or otherwise house themselves, or they can exercise their free will to live on the street in filth. But the left refuses to look at that. They have decided that the homeless are forced to live that way, and again by shortages of housing or other problems, mental health issues and whatnot. So therefore, the government must get involved and not just remove them from a piece of property, but make sure that they have a place to live. And as a matter of fact, it's not the government's job to do that at all. It's just their government's job to enforce the laws. And if the laws say you can't live in a particular place, you can't live there. That's it. So, and the reason, I want to get to the reason real quick about why it's important to get to the root, whether it's determinism, skepticism, or whatever. Once you understand and know where the left is going, the proper response is to tell them determinism is dead. Skepticism is dead. Get to the root. And the reason you do that is because if you don't, and you have a debate or a discussion without realizing where this debate is, the root of this debate is, you are going to argue past your opponent. You and your opponent are going to argue past each other. And I'm sure you've heard those conversations usually on the radio, where two people of different philosophical or political beliefs are having a debate or a discussion, and you can tell that they're arguing past each other. And the reason is because more than likely it is the conservative that doesn't understand where the left's argument is coming from, the root of the left's argument. Because the left wants to keep that, the determinism, skepticism, etc. They want to downplay it. They want to keep it in the background. Because if they have to have an open debate about the value or the existence or the contradictions involved in determinism, skepticism, etc., they're going to lose, and they know it. So what they do is they presume determinism, presume skepticism, and hope to sneak it past their political opponents. And when they do, the argument is never really, if you're arguing past each other, you never really settle anything. You never get to a conclusion where one person is shown to be right, another person is shown to be wrong, and then the issue is put to bed, and we move on. The issue ends up continuing, and usually continuing in the favor of the left. So I was going to also go ahead and talk about open minds and the little scam that's involved with open minds when people ask you if you have an open mind or don't you have an open mind. But I think I'll go ahead and save that for another time. So tomorrow on Storytime, I'm going to continue with Ayn Rand. It'll be chapter 7 from Philosophy Who Needs It. So until then, thank you very much for joining me and have a great day.